All right, so we're going to get started here shortly now. I'd like to start by thanking everybody for coming. It's been a great day. This is our third panel. We had two earlier today, and it's got momentum, and so we're just going to keep it rolling. I just want to remind everyone that after this, there'll be a reception right next door, food and refreshments, and just, time to mingle and come talk to the panelists a little bit further. But we have an extraordinary panel today that will be moderated by Yolanda Jackson. She's the Deputy Executive Director and Diversity Director at the Bar Association of San Francisco, and I'll let her introduce the rest of the panel. But again, thank you for coming, and thank you, panelists.
I will echo the thank yous for being here this afternoon. To my immediate left is Guy Rounsaville, who is a partner at Allen Matkins. And just by way of background, Guy was very instrumental back in the 1980s in helping the Bar Association of San Francisco get started down the track of looking at diversity and parities in law firms and law offices, and really, in my opinion, stuck his neck out at a time when people were afraid to talk about this topic. So we will always have a soft spot for Guy in our hearts at the Bar Association because he got us started with our first goals and timetable report that got this all started for us. To his left is Chloe Hewlett. She's a partner at the Nossaman firm, and she has picked up where Guy kind of left off while he was doing other things in his profession, and has served on many of our boards and speaks on panels for us all the time about this topic, and is always very willing to have the candid discussion and to say the not so popular things about this topic that really get people energized and thinking outside of the box. And to her left is Wilma Wallace, who is the Vice President and Deputy General Counsel for the Gap, Inc. And Wilma is really taking the lead in terms of in-house counsel, legal departments, in making a difference in this area. And again, she is willing to stretch the boundaries a little bit to get people's attention, again, to bring very important issues to the table from an in-house counsel perspective. And she's definitely an individual who realizes the power that she has to make a difference in this area, and she's not afraid to exercise that power. So I'm really privileged to be here with this panel today. What we all decided we're going to do is take you on a road trip. And we want you to really look at your career as if it is a road trip, okay? So imagine yourself doing the driving and controlling the steering wheel. That is what happens with your career. You control your own destiny. Don't let anybody else control that. Don't let anybody else tell you where you need to be going. You have to set your own itinerary. You don't want to rely on anybody else to do that, which means you have to own where you're going and how you get there. Every now and again, though, you're going to need navigational help from your GPS system. You're going to need to be comfortable enough, even the men in the room, pulling over and asking for directions. And you're going to need to talk to each other to get your bearings and learn the rules of the game along the way. And that can happen with your mentors and your sponsors, which we'll talk a little bit more about today. You're the one who knows why you're taking the trip, what you want to accomplish when you get there, the music that you'll listen to along the way. You're the one who's going to have confidence in your driving skills. You're going to follow the rules of the road. You're going to know when you need to speed up, when you need to slow down, when you need to take a diversion. And you're going to be the one to know when you need to pay closer attention to the road, when to wash your car, when to clean the windshield, and when to refuel as you need to. And that's what we're going to call branding yourself, okay? So this panel is going to give you guidance and tips on how to make this road trip happen according to your plan. They're going to tell you how to be well prepared for the trip, how to stay on course, and how to keep your car looking good and in good mechanical condition. They'll do so by talking to you about your role in this whole diversity effort. We're going to really try to get people away from talking about it being somebody else's responsibility. We don't want it to be about the decision makers in the firm. We don't want it to be solely about in-house counsel driving the business. We want everybody who has a role in the legal profession to take responsibility for the efforts here. So I'm going to start by asking Guy immediately to my left. How would you define who's responsible for achieving diversity success in the legal profession? Is it associates? Is it partners? Is it clients? Or is it managing partners?
All of the above. I love the analogy of the road trip, but but I've never been a very good driver, and I've always had to have help along the way. And when you get to certain rest stops and you talk to people in your firms or your corporate legal departments about how they achieve certain successes, I will guarantee you that they had a good mechanic, a good mentor, a good somebody who helped them along their way as well. No one does all the work in this drive by yourself. Now, it is clear that it's a two-way street, that there's responsibility on the driver, but your support system also has responsibility. I gave a talk recently about the difference between corporate diversity, corporate legal department diversity, and the diversity within law firms. And I think one of the biggest differences is that while law firms may be great lawyers, not many of them spend a lot of time in the HR area and talk about what it's like to have interpersonal relationships. I was very, very fortunate when I started out as a young lawyer knowing nothing at Wells Fargo. I had a boss who was also a mentor and also became a dear friend. Without that gentleman, you know, I would not have become a general counsel and my career would have gone off on a different tangent. So I think it's a two-way street. I think, yes, we all individually have responsibilities, and when things don't work, I think we have to take the initiative sometimes, because on the other side of the street, our bosses, our partners, the people who have successes in the firms, I truly believe we deal with a profession of good-hearted people that want everyone to succeed in. When they invest money in hiring someone, they don't want that person to walk out the door as a failure later on. It reflects badly on them. It's an economic loss. But sometimes, because they are focused on their own jobs and they haven't been focused on, you know, the HR side of life, sometimes I think people walk out the door and they say, what happened? That person had so much potential. What went wrong? And so, you know, if there is a stalemate, I think that's the time you knock on the door. You find that friend, you find that mentor who can give you a roadmap to how do you get to the people, how do you find that information you need to be successful. So it's a two-way street. We all have a responsibility ourselves, but the people that we work with also have a responsibility. Sometimes we have to wake them up when we pull into the gas station late at night and they're not there to help us.
Yeah. Great. So Chloe, we know that at some point it's going to be about the business and the money. So how do we talk about diversity in terms of how it's a value to business, but more broadly, how it's a value to society, the culture of the firm, the client? And I'd like for you to reflect back to what you and I both heard Dr. Cornell West say a few weeks ago in terms of diversity more broadly.
And I'd like to say I spent over 30 years, you know, going in and speaking to different businesses and law firms, trying to convince them of the economic benefit of diversity. But I think in the last couple of years, I've really been thinking about what is the value of diversity to this country and what is the value of diversity to me. And these are some of the thoughts that I've come up with. First and foremost, I look at diversity as supporting the next generation and the current generation of leaders. And why is this so important? One, because I really do believe that our greatest resource is the people of our country. And further, even more important, is to really look at your history. We would not be here without the support of our parents, our grandparents, our forebears, and we have a great duty as a result of all the support and all the generations that are responsible for us being where we are, to repay that debt, to fulfill our obligations. In short, I look at diversity as our humanity. And I know some of you are going, golly, Chloe, you're getting kind of heavy right here. You're just talking about it as if it's a moral value, humanity, our future. And the reason why I'm getting this heavy is because I believe that the fight for diversity is a marathon. It is not a sprint. It is very, very difficult. And there will be times when one wants to give up. And you will give up unless you really reach in and find your internal value that you take diversity as your mission. And I believe if we all start looking at diversity from that perspective, then whatever hurdles have come our way, we will be able to meet them.
One add-on to that is in doing the responsible thing that Chloe's talking about, Dr. West made a very impactful statement that I have just really been focusing on a lot lately, and that is doing this work from your own lane. And the distinction he made in making that point is the work that he does around racism and diversity, and how he always appears to be in conflict with our president about what to do in that space. And he said that he's come to the realization that they can both get to the same end game, but by doing so in their own lane. He can do it by being controversial and in your face. The president does it in his own way. So I just wanted to highlight that because each one of us is going to have a different tolerance for how much we can say, how loudly we can say it, how much we're willing to do, how many people we're going to be willing to bring along with us once we become part of the practice. But just know that whatever you do is going to help, okay?
And if I can add on to that, Yolanda, with a bit of my own personal story, which is that I am from the East Coast originally, was born and raised and schooled there, and have never been west of Chicago until I came out to interview as a first year for a summer job at Oric. And the minute I landed in San Francisco, I knew it was a place that I wanted to practice law. And that meant moving 3,000 miles from my family and everything that was normal for me. And I landed in San Francisco and got to know the San Francisco legal community that summer, and was just impressed that it was a home for me, given my values, the importance of practicing in a progressive community, the importance of practicing in a community that was committed to diversity. And every year I'm exposed to more activity through the Bar Association, through personal relations, and role models that remind me of what a positive, thoughtful decision that was. And we're all so fortunate to be in the San Francisco legal community. I've been exposed to other legal communities, and this one really is special. It is different. A guy didn't know me, but I know of him. His reputation preceded him for many, many years because he was so instrumental in advocating for diversity back in 1989. And the Bar Association was a leader in promoting diversity both in private law firms and within the legal community altogether. Have we made the progress that we hoped we would make back in 1989? No. The statistics are still daunting and to some degree disappointing. When you look at the low number of minority partners or female partners in law firms, the statistics in-house corporations is better, but it still doesn't reflect the color and the commitment, I think, to diversity in this community. So I just want to share, I guess, and applaud the San Francisco legal community and encourage you to walk in the lane that you're comfortable walking in, but recognize that it's a lane that's pretty wide and going perhaps a little further than a lot of other lanes and a lot of other legal communities.
So thank you for that, Wilma. So I'd like to tie this topic up with you answering what you believe is the difference between diversity and inclusion.
So actually, Chloe,
it is one more
quote for that. Right?
Is one more important than the other.
All right, let me think if I can phrase this. Someone said that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. So it's funny because at Gap Inc., and I have a couple of my Gap colleagues here, at Gap Inc., we use the terminology diversity and inclusion. And I personally have some mixed feelings about de-emphasizing diversity because of the connotations behind it and the baggage from some perspectives behind it. But I also appreciate that inclusion and a focus on being inclusive gets at values that are really core to me. And the reason why diversity is important to me. It signals that everyone is to be valued. Everyone deserves to be respected. And the best way to come up with solutions that are optimal is to create an inclusive environment where diverse perspectives can be shared in an open and respectful and sometimes argumentative and dissonant way, but in a way that reaches a result that reflects a variety of different points of view, views and perspectives. So we spend a lot of time at Gap Inc. focusing on inclusion and ensuring that everyone feels that they're being valued for their point of view and their perspective. And the beauty of being in an in-house law department that's a consumer products company, we're a retail company, an apparel company, but we're very publicly facing, and we feel strongly that we should reflect our consumers. So it makes that argument, the economic argument behind diversity and inclusion, a little easier than it might be in a law firm.
Okay. So, Guy, what does it mean for an attorney to navigate their own career? What exactly does that look like?
Well, you know, it's a nice sounding word, but I still am a little bit hesitant to say that one can control all of the variables that affect your career. You obviously have to work hard, you have to be diligent, you have to take individual risk in order to get outside at times your comfort level and make new contacts. You walk into a firm, now what's that firm or that corporation for that matter looking for? They're looking for someone who can add value, and they define value in a great many different ways. One of the things I think is the power of diversity is the fact that you in fact are connected to areas where the traditional white male law firms don't have entree into it. And that should be something that you leverage very, very strongly in order to connect with your network. Bring your network into the business environment and say, my network, and you all have contacts within your network that where there's value out there, where there's business, where there's potential upside for the law firm relationship, you can bring that in and don't shy away from it. Don't try to immerse yourself totally within the environment that you might see in the law firm, because you do have some unique qualities and some valuable qualities that you want to make sure you never lose. So be conscious of yourself, be conscious of where you came from, as it was said earlier by my colleagues on the panel, that you have a difference. And that difference is not something to be shy of or be concerned with, it's something to be proud of and to put it forward. When you see the people around who seem to be the movers and shakers in the environment that you're in, you know, there's got to be ways to contact those people. You're dealing with basically very good people. They may not know how to bridge some of the gaps they see, because we have this comfort level that sameness attracts sameness. And I'm no different than anybody else. We did a seminar at Allen Matkins this last year where we had implicit bias. And it was just remarkable to see what your brain does in an MRI when you, in fact, see something that is different than you, and as compared to when you see something that looks like you. So we are, in a lot of ways, going back to the very basics, that when you see people who look like you, there is this implicit comfort level. When you see people who are a little different than you, there is this, I'm a little awkward about how do I approach this person. So you've got to help that person on the other side sometimes get over that awkward feeling, because they are good people, they want to connect, they don't want to lose the investment in your talent, because you are their future. The young people coming into law firms are the future of those law firms, and if there's a failure there, everyone suffers, the individual and the institution. So I think, take a risk, get outside your comfort level, help the other person on that equation get outside their comfort level as well. And one other thing is that as every group, there's going to be great successes in this room, and there'll be other people that have to struggle with it. When you're driving that car along and your car is just humming and everything is going well, don't forget where you came from. And if you see one of your colleagues broken down by the side of the road, make sure you stop and help that person. I've seen too many people who worked twice as hard to get where they were, but once they got there, it was sort of like they embraced the culture that perhaps was the barrier and said, I had to work so hard to get here. Somebody else come along has to do the same thing. And that's not right. You know, good people should be given a fair, level playing field chance. And when you get to success, you make sure you don't forget your brothers and your sisters.
Okay. So Chloe, let's go to something kind of meaty. Let's talk to them about how important it is to generate business and how that ties into the politics, if you will, that play into billable hours, client credit, equity partnership versus non-equity partnership.
Well, when I first came to a law firm, it was 8 years ago, and I had practiced for 22 years, primarily in government, so I didn't know the first thing about billable hours or the culture of a law firm. And yet, I was made partner and was brought into the law firm for the purposes of developing business. And it was so interesting coming in at that point in time, as opposed to going up through the ranks as an associate, because I had to learn right off the bat the business case of the law firm as well as its culture. And so first and foremost, it's very important to understand what is the culture of this environment. And with diversity, it means understanding the culture of something that you're not familiar with. So I had to first and foremost understand the culture. And one aspect of the culture that I saw in law firms, because I had come as a high-level public official, I'd been in politics all my life, is who were the people that have the power? And I found that those that have the power were the ones that had the biggest book of business and controlled the book of business. And that where there was true inclusion is when there were diverse people who were given pieces of that book of business and were able to control the book of business. And how did that come about? In my case, I spent a lot of time networking and developing clients, but I also spent a lot of time bringing with me associates of color with me to the pitches and teaching them the aspects of business development. Because the one thing, it is very difficult to be a change agent in a law firm unless you have the power to make the change. And the power is not just about doing an exceptional job on your projects, because there are many lawyers that are exceptional, but they become, in some cases, is why many lawyers of color leave law firms. They become service partners, where they're servicing other lawyers who have the big clients. So we must learn to break that culture. We must learn to attack the business case and to, right off the bat, learn how to develop one's own book so they can have the power to make that change, so that they can have the power to make sure that other attorneys of color are able to get a piece of the pie.
I totally agree with those comments. When I was general counsel at Wells Fargo, I met with a group of minority lawyers, and I was very proud of what Wells Fargo had done under the California Minority Counsel Program. We had made sure that there was diversity on our teams that they worked for us. But what I didn't know was how the law firms actually worked and who got credit for that work. And while I was up there pontificating about what we had done and all the good things we had done, I noticed I wasn't getting what I thought would be the appropriate reaction from the audience. And I finally said, well, what's wrong, you know? And they said, well, Guy, it's true. We do a lot of work for Wells Fargo now, but we're not getting credit for it. And that's where the corporate clients, the the California Minority Council program, you know, is a constituency of various parties, minority law firms, minorities and majority firms, and corporations. And I've always felt, perhaps because of where I came from originally, I've always felt that one of the most critical elements of that triumphant was the fact that the corporations, the clients, can in fact dictate to the law firms and tell them what they want and who's going to get credit. Walmart has done it, Microsoft is doing it. A lot of corporations are very, very proactive now in how they're dealing with their law firms and who gets credit. And however it happens, once you start getting credit, you become very important to that law firm. It's very visible and very, very important for you to get that credit. So you've got to be candid with your clients too. You know, I was surprised by what I heard from the group that I was talking to, but you've got to reach out not only within the firm, with the power brokers there, but also as you get to know your clients and make sure that you're candid with them and tell them how things are working out, because they can be a great positive influence on your career and in the right way.
And I think just to add to that, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, is really developing your own board of directors. And those are the people that are close to you, that you're networking with, that can advise you on how to develop business, that will go to bat and advocate for you if you're not getting that appropriate credit. Because sometimes when you're in these firms, a senior partner is going to want to take that particular client that you've developed, and you may need to have your board advocate on your behalf with the firm.
So is it ever too, did you have something? Go ahead.
Yeah, just a follow-up.
Yes, yep.
Which is, and I feel this so firmly, given the meetings I'm in and just my own personal experience, is particularly for people of color and women, it is really important to find people who are going to give you some honest feedback. And you need to listen to that honest feedback and process it. And there are a lot of statistics behind feedback that minorities in particular, and people of color, and believe me, there are a lot of white men, I'm married to one, who don't take feedback well. So, so I'm not trying to just to isolate, but it is difficult, particularly if you are diverse in a non-diverse environment. It is often difficult for people to feel comfortable giving you feedback, whether it be that that dress is too short, or you spoke too softly, or you were too aggressive. That's hard feedback sometimes for people outside of, you know, your group to give you. And in the situation of people of color and women, your immediate group may not be the people who are in control, or the people who are in the meetings who are hearing the other feedback based on perceptions that other people in power are sharing. So a piece of advice I would give everyone here, I give people who I work with and people who I manage, and I was a personal beneficiary of this, is find mentors, sponsors, board of directors, anyone within the professional environment who see how you show up in meetings, who see how you engage when you're under stress, who can assess your command controls, your influence controls, I mean, all of those different elements of success in an environment, in a professional environment, who will give you honest feedback and take you aside. And I just encourage you to listen to it. It often took me years before I actually would understand the feedback that I might have gotten 3 or 4 years in a row. And finally, it just clicks. So those kind of feedback mechanisms can really provide a significant breakthrough in your career, and all of a sudden that aha becomes pretty pronounced. You know, another example, if you have the opportunity to do 360 reviews, it's very common in a corporate environment. I've had some of my more significant breakthroughs when I got a piece of feedback that all of a sudden just made a lot of sense. Whether I agreed with it, it was a perception that I knew I needed to address in order to kind of break through the barrier. And what I would also say is, I think it's natural in one's career to just have moments where you're up against a barrier. You know, you've done great work up to a certain point, and then your roles and responsibilities change, or you become a 6-year associate versus a 5th-year associate or a partner. I mean, there are all these different points in time in your career when the expectations change on you. And you're benefiting yourself, I guess, if you can anticipate where those changes are going to take place before you find yourself in that new environment and then having to adjust.
Okay. I would wrap up Wilma's comments with, don't ever be too arrogant to ask for any feedback from people. That's the other piece. That recognize that people may be uncomfortable giving it to you with unsolicited. You should seek it out. And be ready to accept whatever it is people tell you and do something with it. So I want to hone in a little bit more on this issue of what it means to succeed in a law firm, and just have the real conversation about how likely is it that someone will ever reach consideration for partnership within a firm if they don't figure out the rules of the game internally. You guys have spoken a little bit about getting to know the right people, but how early is it too early to start developing your book of business that you're going to need 10 years from now, 5 years from now? And if someone gets offered the opportunity to be a non-equity partner, should they be thrilled with that, or do they do something different and hold out for the equity partner status? Anybody can take that. You've all worked in big firms.
Chloe or Guy? That one to you.
Well,
I left early on.
I am, director of diversity at Allen Matkins. In most of my life, it's been in the corporate side. However, I've been around long enough to know what the law firms that I used when I was in the corporate side, what they valued in people. And I think, just taking myself, I remember when I first started out, as a very young, inexperienced, know-nothing lawyer, and I mentioned earlier the value of this one person who, in effect, was my mentor and friend. Without him, I don't know where I would have been in that context. But the one thing that I did wrong is that I said, all right, I'll just do the work, and the work will, in fact, speak for me. And that's important. That's one aspect. You're not going to dance within a corporate legal department or a law firm unless you do good work. And you need to train yourself in all aspects of what that means, good work, and that means you need to get feedback. But the thing that I did not do enough of was thinking, all right, beyond that, what is it that gives value to this environment that I'm in? In a law firm situation, and we touched upon it earlier, is the business development. I think every day you got to carve out an hour of what can I do through my network, through my experience, through where I came from, through contacts I have through law school, through the bar associations I belong to, the community groups I belong to. Where can I bring value? And the value, once again, can be defined as you, in fact, develop it. It doesn't have to have a pre-definition of what value is. It can be business, it can be contacts, because many times business is not the immediate person, it's the person who knows that other person who knows that other person. But you need to think about how I can, in fact, add value. Besides just doing great work, how can I add value to the environment I'm in? And that allows you to look at everything. And it won't happen naturally. I think you have to carve out and schedule it. I'm going to think for this hour, for this half hour, whenever that might be, what it means to develop business, what it means to leverage my community, leverage my network, and make sure that you never let that go aside, because you'll be working hard and all of a sudden you say, I haven't thought about business development. I haven't thought about how I can engage with my community, how I can connect my law firm with my community. You need to have a discipline about that, I think, very much so.
And I would also say, if you asked me, well, when should you start? I think you should start in law school. I think the thing that really helped me to develop a real book of business and contacts was that I was always networking. Now, at the time that I was networking through the law school, I wasn't thinking about it in terms of building a book of business. I was just thinking in terms of fulfilling my passions by the different nonprofit boards I was involved with, or the different political fundraisers. I've now come to see, after 30 years, that by following my passions, they have become my greatest business development tool. And when Guy was saying you have to make time for it, it has to be mandatory, because it is from those contacts and those organizations that you are involved in that will enable you to build your book. And you have to be out there 24/7. It's only what you did in the last week is what's going to manifest itself in the future. And right now is not too early to start.
And don't be detoured on our journey here by the fact that your particular work environment, whatever it might be, doesn't give you billable hour credit for being involved in these networking organizations. It is mining, and a lot of times you dig and you dig in this mine and you don't get any, you don't hit the mother blow. But you've got to continue doing it, even if the law firm is saying, that's extra time. We all do that, it'll be extra time. Whatever that is, it's still so important to engage in it. And don't get caught up in the billable hour. I'm only going to do what I get credit for in the billable hour, because I think that is a very narrow lane that eventually has a dead end to it.
And I would just add to that, for the Gen Xers and Yers in the room, your definition of networking is very different than what these baby boomers up here have been through. And that's a whole separate panel in and of itself, trust me. I do a lot of research and reading into this. But just keep in mind what that means for you. Does it mean being on Facebook all day with all of your friends? Is that your idea of networking and keeping in touch and figuring out who's going where and who's gotten a job where and who's working for what company? I don't know the answer, but make sure that you tie it into something that can bear those nuggets down the road. When you're not out there meeting people face to face in the traditional sense that I'm sure Chloe means, from 20 years ago when she started, going to one reception after another and handing out business cards and meeting people and taking people to lunch, and that's the traditional networking model. But I don't know if that's going to exist when you all get into the practice and you're 10 years down the road.
I'm 68 years old. I just signed up today for a web seminar to learn how LinkedIn can really be helpful in my profession.
LinkedIn. Wow. If I can add something to that, Yolanda, because as you were talking, Chloe, I was not a networker at all. I mean, one of my pieces of advice would be thoughtful and planful in your career, which I would say I was not at all, and have probably just become more reflective about my career in the past 5 to 10 years. So, after 40. But I maintained close relationships with people from my past, including my colleges, my high schools, and my law school. And most of those people I never, ever would have thought would be partners, in major law firms in DC, New York, San Francisco, would be judges, would be head of executive directors of national organizations, and lo and behold, 10, 15, 20, 30 years later, they were. And I knew what they were up to, freshman year, and I knew how little they studied, for crim law. But those are the people, and I say that because you're sitting around your network. So it doesn't necessarily mean going out there and having drinks all the time and having cards and throwing them around. That's a huge piece of it, and you may well need to do that in this economy. But the people you're sitting around in your classroom, believe it or not, are some of the people in 5, 10, 20 years maybe 25, who become those nuggets and that network for you to tap into. So don't squander those relationships, is what I would say.
Actually, I want to echo what Wilma said. Actually, I'm an attorney at the USA at the federal government here. And I wanted to echo what she was saying as far as these two classmates here. When I was at the firm, a classmate of mine called me 10 years later. I hadn't talk with him, whatever. He's in Arizona, I'm in San Francisco. He has a case here in San Francisco. He calls me up, wants to offer me business. And I hadn't talked to the guy in 10 years, but we were close in law school. And that's how I got business. And some partners in the firm who hadn't talked to me at all, oh, here you got some business. this business report comes out of who's generating business. And when matters came up, you're like, wow, generating business. So it is currency. It is very valuable. And it's just the context you're having right here. So don't underestimate what they're saying at all.
Thanks.
Thank you, Juan. Okay, so we're going to shift to a topic that's really near and dear to Wilma's heart, and she's actually the one who put this on the table for us to share with you. The branding yourself and what that means. And it doesn't really just mean washing the windows on your car and refueling your gas tank every now and again. So Wilma, why don't you give us your vision of what that means, what that looks like, and some of the practical steps on how one can do that well.
Okay.
And I like your inauthenticity
Yeah.
piece of this discussion.
Thanks for the lead, Yolanda.
That's what the moderator does.
What is she talking about? So pardon the Gap speak a little bit, you know. So Gap's a consumer products company. We talk a lot about branding, you know. And when I think about that from a professional point of view, it's really about thinking through how you show up. You know, how do you show up when you walk through the door? How do you show up when you're in the elevator? Every morning I'm in the elevator giving myself a little pep talk about how I want to show up that day, the patience I'm going to have. You know, going down my mental list of the things that I need to accomplish. But a lot of my conversation with myself is how I need to show up as a leader and a manager and someone who can be relied upon. And I go back to what I believe are my fundamental values, which contribute to how I brand myself. And I've spent, you know, I don't know, the past 10, 15 years probably thinking more deeply about it. But it starts with having some honest conversations, I think, about your strengths, what's important to you, what you do really well and want to continue to do better, which you do not do that well on, and either need to neutralize so that it doesn't become a barrier or an obstacle for you, or realize that maybe you need to make some different professional choices so that you're able to leverage the strengths that you have and show up in the best way that you can. And certainly when I was growing up and in law school, you know, my sensibility was focus on the things I'm not so good at and not so strong at. And I want to, you know, make sure that I become competent at those. It's probably one reason why I went to law school. I mean, you know, linear thinking isn't, I think, my natural discipline. But it was something that I felt like I wanted to become disciplined about. I wanted to become a technical expert at something. And so rather than doing all the 100 of other things you could do, I went to law school because I wanted that kind of disciplined practice. So it ended up working for me. But I will say that there's a whole theory of career development, professional development that focuses on knowing what your strengths are and leveraging that. And then creating a brand around what those strengths are. Are you able to influence people well? Do you speak well? Do you think well on your feet? Or are you very detail oriented and really hone in on the details? Are you a strategic thinker? Are you a good writer? I encourage you, I guess, to sit back and really reflect upon what you are good at, and then market it, push it, find ways to be able to demonstrate that. Certainly, at least within the Gap environment, you develop a reputation for having the strengths that you have and perhaps having the weaknesses that you have. And you find that work starts to flow in a certain way that if your manager's doing a good job managing you, leverages the strengths and doesn't play to your weaknesses. So it's very helpful in navigating your own career and figuring out what you want to work on and the types of assignments you want to do and the type of culture you want to develop your practice in, to understand what your strengths are and brand yourself accordingly.
So Chloe and Guy, either one of you can go first. In terms of branding, how are times today in terms of branding, marketing, developing business different than from the legal market in the 1980s, for example. And there are a number of things that make us different in terms of the economy, law firms closing, merging, you know, there's a whole host of things that are different. But what would you guys say in terms of branding yourself? How do you navigate today differently than you did when there was a more traditional law firm environment in San Francisco?
I think when there was a more traditional type of environment, I tried to fit myself into the box of the traditional environment because that's what I thought we were supposed to do in order to be successful. Now, after 30 years, I've realized how it is so important to be your own authentic self. And I think through the years I've grown and really realized who I am. I will never be an introvert. I am a strong, aggressive, extroverted Black woman. And no matter how hard I try to be something else, that is who I am. So I've learned to shape that brand into being a successful business developer. It's also very important to find out what your passions are. I talked about diversity and in terms of our obligation, in terms of the value. But diversity also gives you so much back in return, because no matter how successful you become as an attorney, no matter how much of revenue you build through a book of business, you can't take it with you. So there is a part of me that's also part of my brand, a real concern for the underserved and for those that are suffering. So I am involved in a lot of organizations that are serving those that need the attorneys the most, that need strong Black women leaders. So I no longer try to put myself into what would be the traditional box. I look at who I am right now and I just let it bloom and flower. That also means too that I have the responsibility to reach out to those that might be intimidated by me and to try to bring them along as well. That's part of the communication process back and forth.
I don't know if it's the difference in the 80s or today, but I couldn't agree more with what Boy said, in the sense that I can give you one example going back in the early 90s when I was trying to recruit a recently appointed general counsel to become part of the California Minority Counsel program. And she said, Guy, I'm very concerned about joining this program. She was a woman minority, and she said, I can't be viewed within my organization as a one-issue person. I said, well, what was that issue? The issue of diversity. I'm not comfortable saying that I'm going to join in the California Minority Counsel program. I don't want it in any way to reflect on what I've achieved. And I said, my goodness, you shouldn't think that by being part of this effort that we all acknowledge there are problems with, that somehow it's going to marginalize what your accomplishments are. But at that time, she really felt that. And it wasn't the only person that talked that way. She said, I don't want to be viewed that I got here because that I was a person of color. And we had a long talk and have continued to have discussions. And I said, no one gets to where they are on total meritocracy. That doesn't exist. There's always something, a legacy issue, a same school issue. There's nothing wrong with looking out for other talented people of color and women and helping them along, because you are the person who has achieved it. Don't pull up the ladder after you get there. Don't let that institutional barrier block you from doing something that you can do. And I think I see less of that today. I think there's more of a comfort that people realize that we all need help, and those who are professional and those who are competent, there is nothing wrong with saying, I'm going to look around and say, somebody who is a person of color, some woman, I'm going to see whether or not I can help that talented person, because I'll tell you, there's other people making decisions on other types of non-meritocracies in making those same calls. So please don't forget who you are, how you struggle to get where you go, and as I said earlier, don't leave your colleagues on the side of the road.
It's just what you're saying, Guy, strikes a memory for me around, just the myth of the meritocracy, and how people, there's a myth out there that people have earned the position they're in. And I guess you earn it, but you earn it in a lot of different ways. And one of the, I guess, considerations I encourage everyone to consider is there are things that are happening out there that white men have clued into and understand somehow, either through legacy, through, I don't know, golfing, I don't know how they define it out, but somehow, there is a path that's a little clearer for white men, and I'm going to throw it out there, this might be controversial, so, take it for what it's worth, but there's a path that is much clearer for white men than it may be for people of color and women. And everyone is benefiting from a network, from connections, from mentors, from sponsors. And the challenge, I think, is to figure out how you can similarly benefit from that infrastructure yourself. And I have a story that Mary from Pillsbury, Mary Cranston. Who else said Cranston? Marcy. And she tells a story. So Mary Cranston is a luminary in the legal community here in San Francisco and very forward on women's issues now, but she was the CEO at Pillsbury, at the time Pillsbury Winthrop, and one of the first women CEOs of any major law firm here in San Francisco, maybe in the country. And she tells a story about how when she was first nominated to assume the role of CEO, everyone was congratulating her. She was in her office, accepting all these telephone calls, and then opened up her door, and there's a line of 30 white men out in front of her office trying to get lunch with her, explain to her all the great work that they're doing, how important everything that they're doing is. And she says, I looked around and thought, where are the women? Like, why aren't there all these men lining up, promoting themselves, telling me how amazing a job they're doing, and there are no women there. And you know what her theory is, and I experienced it myself, the women were heads down. If I do a good job, if I just, make sure I'm the best lawyer, then I'll, get what's due. And that's not the way it works. It's just not the way it works.
So, that's a great segue into getting comfortable, pulling over to the side of the road and asking for directions. So Wilma, I know you just finished, but you're going to start this one. What is the difference between a mentor and a sponsor?
So a mentor is someone who obviously trusted, you feel like you can get honest feedback from them. Typically, you'll have a relationship with them, a prior relationship with them. And they're a sounding board oftentimes, and someone who you can talk to and hopefully get some feedback from. They typically are a level above you. They could be a peer, but usually more advanced, either senior or more experienced. So someone who's very helpful to have in your careers, and there's a lot of studies that have been done around how much more quickly people advance when they have mentors. But the speed lane, like the carpool lane, is a sponsor. And the notion behind a sponsor is someone who you may or may not have a personal relationship with. You may or may not like them. They may or may not like you. It's irrelevant. They are someone who holds power. So typically, they're someone who may be much more advanced in their career than you are, but primarily have entree and access, and can use their political capital to advance your career. Those are the people who are in the room when decisions are being made about you, and they have the influence and feel the sense of loyalty or obligation to advance your cause. So sponsorship, mentorship can be appointed, maybe, again, your friends. Sponsorship is something that you earn. You've demonstrated loyalty to this individual who is more senior than you are, who has power and the ability to make significant opportunities for you, create significant opportunities for you. So there's a whole body of study around the notion of mentoring and sponsorship, and how people who are in senior level positions almost inevitably had a sponsor. You don't get to be the CEO of a corporation, or the president of a brand, or the managing director of a law firm without having someone who has spoken up on your behalf when others wouldn't.
Okay, so Chloe, give us a couple of tips on how one would find an effective mentor or sponsor and develop that relationship. And more importantly, what is the role of the mentee?
And mentee has a very significant role. And first, I want you to just put out of your mind that your sponsor / mentor has to look like you and come from the same background as you. If you recall, when we were talking about the board of directors and how important that is. Well, when I first went into my first law firm, the key people that were my sponsors, one who was extremely influential in terms of my career and who I stayed close to this day, was conservative, Republican, Orthodox Jew, Greek, white males. And maybe we didn't see eye to eye on politics on any given occasion, but we could find other common factors in which to talk about. Our children, our spouses. And one of the responsibilities of the mentee is to reach out and to find that common ground. So once you identify someone who could be likely your sponsor to advance your career, it is your responsibility to go to them and find that common ground. Now, I know it's not easy. It's very, very difficult. But once you're able to break that barrier, you'll find that your career will go in an upward motion. And one of my sponsors, in fact, what I would do is, they would not only be my sponsors, I turned them into my mentors before I got them. And I remember one in particular who, his major client was the shipping industry. And he sent me to a meeting of the different members of the shipping industry. And I had never felt so uncomfortable in my entire life. I mean, there was not like one woman in the room, no one of color, and it was in this wood-paneled boardroom with high leather seats. And I didn't think that there would be anything whatsoever I could talk to any of those executives about, because our lives were just so different. But yet, as I listened more to the conversation and I heard one talk about their daughter, then I could move right in and find that common ground. And I know it's frightening to just go up and introduce yourself and even ask questions and talk to someone that you don't know. But it's something that you have to do in these law firms and corporate environments in order to break ground.
Okay, so our final statement, I'm going to ask Guy to opine on, because again, this was his suggestion in our preparation for this meeting.
Actually, Yolanda, before you get there, I just want to follow with Chloe. So, how do you go up to someone and you want them to be your sponsor, you want them to be your mentor, but without seeming opportunistic?
So Juan, if you don't mind, as soon as he's done, I'm gonna take questions and you'll be the first.
Oh,
one.
I'm sorry,
Okay?
I'm sorry.
No problem, no problem. You know what a control freak I am, don't you?
She's being her authentic self.
It's her brand.
And he knows it, that's what's sad. Okay.
He said, I'll do it
so-
once, but not again.
So the final question, you talked about just some of the challenges and barriers that young associates face in law firms. And I wanted you and either of the two panelists to comment on whether or not those challenges and barriers are unique to attorneys of color. Or are there certain barriers that exist no matter what you look like in the first couple of years in the law firm model?
Well, I think it's a matter of degree. I think that every young lawyer coming into a law firm or a corporate law department is going to feel a bit apprehensive. You know, it's a new environment, and obviously, you know, you want to do the best job possible to be successful. But when you walk in and you look around and there's only a few people that look like you, then I think there are other factors that come in, and it makes it much more difficult for a person of color or a woman to go into what is still pretty much a white male environment. So yeah, I think there is some real challenges that affect a person of color or a woman in the legal profession that I would not face as a young lawyer going in. That doesn't mean it's easy. It's going to be a challenge for all of us, but the whole discussion we've been having today is, I think, focused on those things that are particularly applicable to women and lawyers of color. You know, I often think that, you know, we have worked very hard in the legal community in San Francisco and California as a whole. I think I'm very proud of what we've done in California, but especially what we've done in San Francisco. We put in structure, we talk about it, we have these types of meetings. But you know, what I'm very optimistic about is when I see the pipeline, and I know the pipeline is stressed that, you know, because it's Prop 209 of its prodigy, but there is still a growing number of young lawyers like yourselves coming into the marketplace, and eventually, when those young lawyers struggling through the various barriers we've been talking about become the majority within those firms, where you have, right now we have 40% women associates, you know, there's still only 16% women partners, but it's better than the 3% back in the, you know, that were in law school back in the 60s. So eventually there will be a tipping point. And all of this stuff we're talking about, how people connect, how people look out for people that look like them, the sameness attracts sameness, is going to start swinging over to favor our community as it exists in reality. And that gives me great optimism. You can't go to sleep until that happens, because it won't happen as fast as it otherwise would if we do go to sleep. So we have to continue to press and make sure we do these things. But ultimately, I think the tipping point will come about just because of the critical mass of diversity in women in our profession, and that will take care of a lot of the issues that we're talking about today.
Questions, Juan?
I do have a question. I'm just following up on how you do that without being appearing opportunistic.
Yeah.
I thought about your question when you asked it, Juan. To me, there's nothing wrong with being optimistic. I mean, I think you want to be viewed in a proper way, to be, you know, engaged, to be, you know, if I'm a senior person, you walk up to me and start talking about, you know, I have some questions, I'm going to view that as a positive thing. You know, as I said in many of my comments, I think the people who are part of the establishment today are good people. They want to do it. They're very busy also. And what they need to do is have a light switch turned on once in a while and say, gosh, that person really, you know, wants to take, you know, wants to learn, wants to be successful. And you'll find some people who are, you know, too busy, you know, but it's, you know, you knock on 9 doors, you get one good answer, it'll be worth your career the rest of your life.
And I would encourage, in some cases, just start off small, you know, asking, can we have a cup of coffee? I think what's really important to remember is don't be afraid of rejection. As Guy just mentioned, you may ask 8 different people for a cup of coffee and to sit down and converse with them, and maybe only one response. But that one could be the most significant person in in shaping your career. And if you don't get out there, and if you don't reach out, then you will not advance.
I wanted to feedback. I wanted to thank Wilma for the topic on branding yourself, because I think, well, I know in corporate America as well as in college, they teach you how to focus on your weaknesses. In one of my graduate courses, I took a leadership course, and there's 2 books that I would like to recommend. One is called The Strength Finder 2.0, and it talks about, it's an assessment tool to help you develop your strengths and find out what your strengths are, and then what your weaknesses are, so that you can apply that. And then there's a second book called Now Discover Your Strengths by Donald O. Clifton and Marcus Buckingham, that once you've identified your strengths, which can be helpful for law students, new attorneys, experienced attorneys, people like myself who's changing careers, to assess what my strengths are and then maintain my weaknesses, and then use that in whatever process of my career. So I read that book like early on, so thank you for doing that.
No, I have 2 copies of it sitting in my office right now. I just took the examination again because I'm asking my team to actually do it. And I feel like I know myself pretty well, and it nailed me, on the head, just what my strengths are and maybe the things that I'm not so good at. So it is a great book, and it is by Marcus Buckingham. I recommend it.
Yes.
I have a general question. I was wondering if your experiences have been a little different in terms of mine. Ever since I've started law school, I really don't know what kind of law I want to get into, so I'm trying to try different things at this point. And one thing that I find really interesting is when I'm asking, like, even professors or just random people who find out that I'm going to law school, kind of what their practice is about, or what any practice is about, really. What I find them recommending to me most often is criminal law or family law. And a lot of it is because they look at me and they think, you know, you should really do criminal because people in the system need to see more people like you, or you should do family for the same reason. So I was wondering if your experiences have been different, because it's hard, you know, when you're automatically being kind of like, oh, this is what you should do, how do you break out of that?
Let me tell you, it involves Golden Gate Law School. There's a group here called the Capital Group. I spoke, I guess, early 2010 on a panel, and afterwards spoke to some of the leaders of this group, and they said, you know, what we don't get is what's going on in a real law firm or real practice. We don't really know. Same question. We don't know what we want to do. And so we put together a couple of seminars where they say, we don't know about how Alan Atkins, a real estate firm, how it got established. So we brought some real estate lawyers in, and we had 10 or 12 of their colleagues come over, and we talked about real estate practice. Then they said, how about litigation? We put together a group to talk about litigation. I think there's great resources in the legal community of San Francisco that would take time, you know, either individually or collectively, like I just described, that would take time and talk to you about, you know, how a person selected whatever he or she is doing. And we, you know, that's part of our, I think, responsibility to give back to our legal profession and to the young people coming into it, is to say, this is how I got to where I am. Some of it just happenstance, but others, you know, people who are thoughtful. And so when you're in that totally understandable situation, saying, I'm not really sure what I want to do, the best way, I think, or one way to do it, is to talk to people who are doing something of a particular discipline within the legal profession and see, you know, if there's something that resonates with you.
So I hear the undertone of your question being about, you feel like you're being pigeonholed because A, you're a woman, possibly how you look to other people. I know Chloe's going to have an opinion on this, but I want to set up the fact that Chloe has a very unique legal job. She does political law, and she lobbies our Senate, legislature, and our governor all day, all the time. And we know what that body of people looks like, right? So I think I'm on this one, that she will have very good advice for you on people pigeonholing you in criminal and family law, where there are a lot of people of color in terms of clients that come through that business area.
Well, first I wanted to say, as one who hasn't figured out what she really wants to do when she grows up, that life is long, and you have a tremendous opportunity to do many different areas of the law. My mentor, while I was in law school, was a man by the name of Justice Clinton White. And he convinced his mentees that we should all go into criminal law and go into the prosecutor's office so that we could change the system. And several of us went in. In fact, I was an assistant district attorney for over 11 years. And I went from there to be director of moral character for the state bar so I could get administrative experience. And then I went to work for Governor Ray Davis as a high-level public official. And for the last 8 years, I've been an attorney in the public policy area. And I say that to you because you may not know what you want to do, even when you graduate. And that's okay. I think the important thing is to follow Guy's advice and don't be afraid to experiment. You may find yourself in a law firm for 3 to 4 years and decide that that's not for you. You may go into the public sector like I did, whether it's in criminal law, prosecution, or defense, and find out that's not for you. And that's fine. And if you are one of the fortunate ones, more like my friend over here on the left, to find that perfect job early on, that's fine as well. But I really want to kind of remove any kind of anxiety that you might have, that you have to find the perfect job.
And stay with it for
And
30
stay
years.
with it. Follow what comes in here. And if you feel like someone's trying to pigeonhole you in a position, and that's not what you really want to do, fine, do something else. Do what your heart tells you. And your heart may change, as it does with me frequently.
I had 2 things I want to go through. One, ignore them, okay? Just ignore them, okay? And then the second is, my experience is that different practices really call upon different strengths and skills. And I guess to echo what Guy is saying a little bit, talk to people about really, what is your job? Like really, what do you spend your day doing? And if you really like writing and it's a strength of yours, then maybe you want to be in a large law firm or an appellate practice and you write summary judgment motions all day and you're in the law library or maybe on the computer now. You know, that's one practice. Juan's practice, you know, at the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to be really different. Do you want to litigate? So we say, do you want to be a lawyer? And I think people are more focused on the organizational infrastructure than what the particular day-to-day tasks are of the job. So I would say, again, just do the match and figure out what do I like to do, how do I like to spend my time, do I want to be with a lot of people, do I not want to be with a lot of people, and you start to get some direction.
One common theme that I've heard from attorneys is that the field of law is constantly changing, and I've heard that a lot of attorneys are doing jobs that didn't exist when they were in school. So what suggestions do you have for someone like myself, I'm a 1L, to be dynamic and be able to change with the career, and any tips for me to start now? A challenging question.
Well, I think Chloe said that, you know, you basically have to just be nimble and be willing to seize the moment, because, you know, I don't think you can just plot, you know, a course of action. You know, I've had several wonderful jobs, none of which, you know, I really planned for when I was in law school, and it was a connection with a person who said, would you be interested? And I said, why not? With the idea that I would sample it and see what happened. Well, one of those samples lasted 30 years, and you know, it's I look back on it now, and it happened so fast, and I think it's just a wondrous thing. I wish I took some responsibility for it, or credit, because most of it was just, opportunities, a lunch when you had a friend, and you would say, there's an opening, would you be interested? It's remarkable how random it is, but the main thing is to be aware of and constantly sort of being sensitive to these opportunities. I think it'd be inappropriate for us to try to chart how you would do what you're going to do to be aware of all the different things that are going to happen, since I don't think you know what's going to happen, literally speaking, tomorrow. But I think you just prepare yourself, have good foundation, and basically be, aware of and be open to opportunity when it comes along.
Yeah, so one broad observation I have is that I don't think it's an issue with the newer generations, again, frankly, is that once you go into a practice area, that your mindset is that you're going to be there for the next 15 years. I coach, and as does Lauren, who worked with me, we coach a lot of young associates and law students, and there's like change now every 2 or 3 years where they're doing something very different than they were 2 or 3 years before. And at the core of that, to Wilma's point, is your strength and skill set. Everyone up here has had a very checkered path, which has led us to where we are. I started out doing insurance litigation and coverage work, started my own mediation practice, transitioned that into diversity training, and now I'm the deputy at the Bar Association of San Francisco. And I'm only 25. So
Like a rock star.
Wait a minute, I was at a birthday party.
So I think the main point is it is okay to experiment. It's not a failure if you get into something and 2 years later decide I want to shift gears a little bit. And again, we coach a lot of people down this path, and the biggest hurdle is getting them to not feel guilty about wanting to make a change.
This may be bad advice, but, well, there's a piece of good advice, which is just you need to be technically good at whatever you do. And there's certainly just, writing skills, influencing skills that you just need to have to be a lawyer in many regards. Detail, if you go into an area of practice that requires more detail. But I would also, I guess, encourage you to just keep track of trends and determine which direction the law is moving. So an example would be privacy, social media issues is something that's really hot now that wasn't on anybody's radar 5, 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago. When I was coming up, environmental law in California was hot and heavy. Employment law, just because there was a fair amount of case activity that resulted in some pretty significant changes in those two practice areas. And all of a sudden, there was an opportunity for a lot of employment lawyers and a lot of environmental law lawyers. So there are certain niches that, just every decade, every 20 years, become hot topics, particularly in a jurisdiction like California that is just so active and vibrant from a legal jurisprudence point of view. So that's the only real tactical thing I would say, to figure out what areas you might be interested in between, other than just corporate law or criminal law. There are trends you can start to see.
And the ABA does studies on that on a regular basis, like what new areas are coming out, what areas of practice are hiring the most in any given graduating class. So you can Google that, and they do pretty solid studies on what's hot in the legal profession.
One other thing I would say, and one of the things that was holding me back for so long, because 20 years ago, public policy attorneys didn't even exist. There were lobbyists, but there were not attorneys that specialized in public policy. And I realized that the one thing that terrified me most was change. And what's changed in my life is I look at change as the opportunity to develop and find my true self. But when I first made my leap from law enforcement to even going to the state bar, I was absolutely terrified. I was terrified of the change. I was terrified of going into a new culture, because I knew law enforcement culture, It was like the OK Corral, and I was very comfortable with it. But to go into a corporate culture, or to go into an agency culture, or a political culture, like what I did for Governor Gray Davis, each time, it was very, very terrifying for me. And once I got to the point of looking at change as a way to develop and my real benefit and opportunity, then I became able to change with the trends and change with the times. And that has been my greatest fortune. But we all have to examine our own fear of change and how we view it.
So I want to say thank you to our wonderful, wonderful panelists. You guys had great insights.